we're not in Kansas anymore. And more meteorologists are mapping this and saying, look, there are more tornadoes. It's not just that we have more Doppler and better radar so we know when they happen, but now they're hitting populated areas statistically more than they did in the past, in areas that were already built up. It's not like we've built up more, so more is being hit. That's part of it. No, cities are being hit more. I mean, it was like someone was steering. Some said hundreds. Some estimates are hundreds that formed, but more than a dozen that hit the ground. 800 homes hit. Carnage, Fort Worth, Dallas, again, my old stomping ground where I'm from. And meteorologists are in MSNBC calling it very unusual. Enter the fact that earthquakes are associated in tectonic weapons with auroras forming even in the daytime. Magnetic field, like you normally only see at the North and South Poles, where the magnetic lines come into the Earth and then out, the Earth's shield from the sun coming in at the North and Southern Poles. You will see these vortexes form with all these other populations being hit in Chile and Pakistan and hitting right in key population centers in what we saw a few years ago in Haiti. I mean, it is getting really weird, and they admit they've got this, but it's classified. And enter Paul Watson's latest article. Another Wisconsin town reports strange booms, flashes of light, and it's getting crazy, and the feds have said, do not investigate. So, and again, historically, these are associated then with these weather pop-ups, but again, you can get flashes of light and booms with natural tectonic activity. Bob Fletcher, great to have you back with us. How did you first discover that weather weapons were being deployed and used? When did you discover it? You're an Iran-Contra whistleblower, a successful businessman.
Okay. And it's a pleasure to be back. I really enjoyed doing the program. Well, basically, I had, because of ending up being a federal witness in the Iran-Contra thing and being a federal witness relative to the Christic Institute's lawsuit back in the 80s, which was basically a legal action of racketeering filed against all of those people that were involved with the Iran-Contra stuff. They actually had filed that legal action, as a matter of fact, prior to the expose that became the Iran-Contra inquiry. I ended up being a witness in all of that, and that was what just switched on the light when I found out, and was right in the middle of it, when I found out what kind of unbelievable lies and deviant stuff that was going on with people that we were hoping was leading our country in the right direction. The Senate, the Congress, CIA, the FBI, these guys were supposed to be the protectors of America as opposed to being the drug smugglers and the assassins of America, because that's what I found out to be a reality. And because I was there, I've been there, done that, I saw it. I sat in on conversations with these generals that were involved with the weapons and joking about where they were going to go next, with where the next war was going to be and things of that sort. And these guys profiting, and of course that originally the tremendous amount of the weapons, illegal weapons, stolen weapons, and drugs and all that. The real big input was started in the Vietnam War, where they were smuggling the narcotics back and actually the carcasses of our own soldiers, which I can't think of anything more absolutely disgusting than something like that. And all of that was what opened my eyes. All right, so I started investigating and having people contact me after at the congressional and Senate level. There are a few guys always up there that are honest and legitimate. They're not there very long because they either become removed by assassination, for crying out loud, or they're simply removed by having somebody beat them in the next elections by illegitimate voting or whatever the case may be. But they remove the good guys as quick as they can. but there were always some good people up there that were looking into serious problems. So in a time frame here, we're talking going into the early 90s, and I was investigating and being involved with several different inquiries at the Senate and congressional level with some good guys. Dante Feisel was out of Florida, was concerned with the financial fraud going on, and several others doing things like that. They were kind of under the radar. These are not people that get a lot of media coverage, but they're trying to do the right thing. And, of course, Sonny Bono was another one. We get into that story some other time.
Yeah, we covered that last week. So how did you discover weather weapons? Because now...
So here's what happened. I get a phone call, because, you know, when you're doing this stuff, I get all kinds of really great stuff where people would just send me information, and they would say, you know, don't mention my name, you know. But if you want to risk your life, here's some information. You know, I kind of get a kick out of that. But so I got a phone call, and somebody said, how about the weather control as a weapon? And I said, you know, I was like you. I was incredible. I said, what? And he said, yeah, you know, they're working on this thing where they can control the weather and actually use it as a weapon of war. And I said, well, wow, I mean, if you could do that, that would be really something. I mean, you could wipe out a country, either financially or physically, do all sorts of destruction and things, but it wouldn't be like a nuclear thing. You know, you nuke a place, you can't go in there for 100 years, so that's not a good way to take over a country or cause them problems. But if you could control the weather, that really would be something. And, of course, but my reaction was, you know, okay, well, listen, you know, I got 800 things to do this month, so next month I'll look into it. And he said, you know, we have a treaty. We have a treaty that we've signed back many years ago with at the United Nations.
Yeah, that was in, what, 1976? That
was right. It was 70. Technically, it was 78. But but it was started, I guess, around 76. You know, and at that time, of course, nobody knew about this, all right? And it wasn't out in front. And I said, well, I mean, if I could find a treaty, you know, that's actually signed relative to weather control and being able to do this stuff, that would really be something. So I said, okay, I'll look into it.
Stay there. We're going to see what you found next. Because, folks, I mean, look at how they keep hitting all these cities with these tornadoes. And they keep hitting mainly only in the cities. And even the meteorologists are saying, this is weird, and they're coming out of nowhere. It's not natural. Bob Fletcher Investigations.com is his website. Our websites are Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.tv. I want to continue with weather weapons. Then I want to get Bob Fletcher's take on the end game, where all this is going, what makes these criminal groups tick. But I knew this was coming. CNN weatherman blames tornadoes on climate change. We'll try to play a clip of this later if we have time. If not, we're linking to it up at Infowars.com. And sure enough, whenever there's any earthquake or weather problem, Al Gore says, just pay me carbon money and I'll fix it. And I've always pointed out, because Bill Gates is pushing this too, they can launch the crazy weather and then say, pay us a global tax. In fact, they're now saying, pay for a global weather control bureau and we'll stop the tornadoes or hurricanes from hitting you. In fact, that's what Bill Gates is heavily invested in. We showed like a Reuters article earlier on that. So all of this is going on. Bob, I want you to continue how you started looking into this and discovering it and how advanced it is. But clearly now this is like the mafia saying, I'll burn down your grocery store if you don't pay me protection money. I mean, we know they've got this. The shadow government, no wonder they're so arrogant.
Oh, it's unbelievable as far as that's concerned. I mean, at this point in time, they've been so successful also, you know, which includes things like, you know, assassinating Kennedy in front of everybody and all of that and getting away with it, taking down the biggest buildings in New York City and getting away with it, telling us it was a handful of these characters that a couple of afternoons planned how to do this major, gigantic covert operations. But anyhow, so we'll get back to the weather situation. So here I have a couple people telling me, hey, this is real, and this is approximately 1994. So I was doing some other investigations for someone, and I don't remember who it was at this particular time, actually in the Congress. So what I did was I contacted the United Nations directly, just right with a telephone, just called them, and I told them who I was, and said I wanted to speak to somebody about getting a copy of a treaty that had taken place several years earlier. And they said, oh, okay, and they switched me over to the legal department in the United Nations. And I was, because of doing work at that time for a congressional office, I said, I'm doing a report for the Congress, and I need to have a copy of what is called the Treaty on Weather Modification that was supposedly done sometime around 1976, 77. And the lady was very polite, and she said, hold on a minute. And she came back, and she says, I don't have anything on that. I don't seem to have that. And I said, well, you know what? I bet you that it's not for general public use. You may have to try the other computer program relative to the stuff that we don't usually put out for general public. Right? Now, when I said that, I had no idea what I was talking about in reality. I was shooting a dart in the air. I didn't even know, but I assumed that they probably had the double sets of books, so to speak. So she says, well, okay, hold on. And she says, listen, she got back, she says, this is going to take me a day or so. Can I get back to you? And I said, sure. I gave her my phone number, and I just said, sure, call me back. So son of a gun, the next day, I think it was, following day, this very nice lady called back, and she said, Mr. Fletcher, you were right. It's not for general public distribution, but I do have it, and I found it, and I can send you the whole thing. And I said, well, that's just great. And she says, do you need legal certification? And I said, sure, you got to send certification. And also, technically, I didn't know really what she was talking about. But I said, certainly send that. And she says, do you need it in both French and English? And I said, yes, if you don't mind. And I was laughing to myself because I'm thinking, this is amazing. Whatever. 10 years ago, I was a toy manufacturer, and now I'm doing what I'm doing. Okay, so she sent the whole thing to me. And in a big, nice package, didn't take but a couple of days, and son of a gun, here it was right in my hands, and it's a United Nations treaty to prevent the use, an agreement between the major nations of the world to guarantee that they will not use the weather modification as a weapon of war against each other. This is a treaty like we would do for nuclear weapons. This was done in 1976 and finalized in 77.
Absolutely. Stay there. We're going to be right back. We've got the treaty up on screen for PrisonPlanet.tv viewers. I want to get a big picture look with Bob Fletcher, because he's a smart guy, on studying the New World Order for decades now. I mean, we know it's about eugenics, it's about domination and power, but really, from my research, it's a bunch of wicked control freaks trying to outdo each other. And so it's a synthesis of pure evil, because only the most evil will end up in power, because they're always stabbing each other in the back. And that's why it's so wild and so ruthless and so crazy. Like, why are they letting DU be used? Why are they letting reactors melt down everywhere or leak? Why are they GMOing to reduce the population? I want to get back into weather weapons and what you discovered, but let's get into that question now. Is there a method to the madness? I mean, I know they're good at controlling us, but more and more I realize the elite themselves are psychos who are out of control and who are probably going to end up destroying us, Bob.
There's no question about it. And you know, part of some of my earlier discoveries was the old Iron Mountain report, which I'm sure you've done.
Yes.
reports on. And for the people that don't understand what that was, it was a report actually put together in the early 60s under John F. Kennedy originally, and then passed on to Johnson, of course, after he took his step up to the presidency. But the Iron Mountain report, which there was always a big argument whether that was real or not real and all that, but there was specifically, they laid out the steps that were necessary to be taken in the United States of America at the government level as we moved into a one-world government where we no longer were targeting Russia and Red China and et cetera, and vice versa. When we reached that point in La La Land, when the whole world was one big government, what was going to be the financial steps taken, the psychological steps, the emotional steps, what has to be done to control America? And this was the important point, was as they moved out of a constitutional government into world government, because the idea was, obviously, you can't have a constitution that gives the people the rights to do what we have been doing for 200 years in the United States of America. When we move into a non-aggressive mode, we have no enemies. So in the report, it says we have to come up with synthetic enemies that are equal to the dynamics of that they are artificial enemies that might kill us, the same as Russia or Red China might with atomic weapons, for example. So they write in the report, they put in there, you know what, we can use terrorists, unknown, unspecified, mystical terrorists that would cause us constant threat, because they said to themselves that if we're taking all this money out of the pockets of the taxpayers right now on the basis of weapons that we have to protect ourselves from Russia and the Red Chinese, and if we no longer have them as enemies, we still want to be able to take the same amount of money out of their pockets. So we have to convert into a new enemy. They talked about unknown terrorism, and they talked about maybe UFOs, maybe utilizing the concept of aliens threatening the future of the world, and everybody would come together under one big umbrella, and we can slowly eliminate the Constitution. That's literally written out in the Iron Mountain report.
And by the way, that came out in the 1960s. That got leaked, and it's all come true. The Rand Corporation, I've interviewed Alex Abaya, who wrote a best-selling book about World War II, and so the Rand Corporation liked it and thought that they'd analyzed him and brought him in. And he's one of the only people to ever be given access to their annals. And he's come on the show, and he said it was all true. The end of the family, world government, phasing out all liberty, I mean, just a nightmare future. That is literally what they're establishing.
It is. It was written and created in the 60s. It was a 30-year plan originally, basically, which we pretty much absorbed that at this point in time. Up through that, would have put it into the 90s. They thought it would take that long to accomplish what they had to do. They laid out steps 1 through 9, by the way, which included a world currency, which, of course, they're moving towards the power being transferred to the United Nations or some other such organization on weapons and things of that sort, to move it out of the immediate control of individual nations, which includes us. And
look at Obama's telling Congress, you're no longer over war, and Congress sits there and takes it. And yes, the generals tell him, you're not the boss anymore.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I had this fantastic story that happened. I was contacted because I was out at this time in the 90s all over the United States doing speaking engagements, presentations before I became injured. And I was NBC or ABC contacted me, and they said, Mr. Fletcher, you're talking about this thing called the Iron Mountain Report. And I said, yes, and he said, would you come on and I think it was 60 Minutes. It was one of the major programs. Would you debate the fella that is still alive, the old gentleman that actually originally wrote that book that exposed, the expose of this?
Leonard Lewin.
Leonard Lewin. And he says, because Leonard Lewin is telling us that he just made that all up, that it was all just a novel that he actually put together. And I asked this guy, I said, as a matter of fact, the producer I was talking to, his name was Rick Nelson. Anyhow, sidebar. So he says, I said to him, I said, have you read that? Have you read The Iron Mountain? And he said, no, I haven't, which didn't surprise me. I said, okay, well, I'll tell you what. First off, absolutely, I will go on and debate him face-to-face on your program. And I said, I'm ready to do it next week. You just let me know. I said, but he's not going to do that. He's not going to sit face-to-face with me with the information that I've got on this. And he says, oh, yes, he's already said he would do it. I said, okay, good. I said, but you need to also go over that Iron Mountain report. Well, he called me back in about 4 days, and he said, Miss Fletcher, the network has decided they didn't want to do this. And I said, oh, well, how about that? I said, did you read that report? And he says, yes. I said, did you show it to your superiors? What's actually in that book? And he said, yes. And I said, well, that's why they're saying they don't want to do it. So the bottom line was that I told him, I said, look, if this guy wrote this as a novel, then one of two things has taken place. The United States covert government looked at it and decided it was so great that they would model the entire future of the United States and the destruction of our constitutional government on the basis of this guy's novel. That's one thing. Otherwise, this guy is the greatest psychic that ever lived, because every single thing that he put into this report is taken place, has either taken place already, or they only have 4 more steps, and they're going to be destroying the constitutional government on the basis of this guy's novel. But anyhow, the upshot was all of a sudden they changed from being terribly excited on having me do this show to calling back and saying NBC or whoever it was, I don't recall right today, whoever it was, they weren't going to do it anymore. So that was the end of that. But to get back also to the, I don't even know where they are now. You know, we have some natural things taking place in the weather. There are weather changes going on that might be put into strictly the category of natural weather changes. Well,
Mars has its ice caps melting. The entire solar system has been going through changes, and paying Al Gore money won't stop the ice caps melting on Mars.
Correct. So, but they do exist. But what they've ended up being able to do, so that people have a handle on this, just in general with weather control, they moved from what used to be the archaic manner by which trying to change the weather with seeding with a variety of chemicals and things of that, to what is now electronic means to alter and control the weather. And basically by using frequencies, plasma beams, and superheating the ionosphere in a specific targeted place, they can actually superheat the water, let's say the ocean, over a given square miles, or they can superheat at the same time the ionosphere, causing that weather change that normally might happen by nature with the hot and the cold weather hitting each other.
Exactly. They go, that's what Livingston said, the father of weather weapons. He said they go and find already the tipping point area, and that's where they can get full control. They can create hurricanes. Stanford Research Institute had certified it by 1967. They can kill them, weaken them, make them stronger, and steer them.
Yes, and that's the big point. That's exactly what he's saying is exactly what I was about to say, and that's it. Now, there's 3 parts to this thing now, too, in terms of who is doing it. We are doing it. We are doing it profusely with under the HARP program is only one part of it. The acres and acres of the antennas, towers, and all that up in Alaska. There's another location similar to that around the equator area, but we have moved into using aircraft and satellites. All right, so you can do like a triangulation assassination would do with 2 or 3 people shooting at one person. You have the same kind of a triangulation application with plasma beams from 2 or 3 different places, 2 satellites and maybe 1 ground base, and hit a given area very specifically, so many miles up and so many miles east and west, superheat the atmosphere, and this is where also these some of the contrails come in. Some of the contrails they discovered, again, was I think an accidental thing a few years ago, but that certain types of material, etc., could hold temperature if they were floating in the air. They found out they became conductive to hold an increased temperature. So if you put out a contrail in a given area, hit it with these totally invisible, like a microwave beam.
Well, that's what the other scientists have told me, is that it's not just that they're adding stuff to the jet fuel that aerosolizes in some cases, or they have special jet planes, that go out and do heavy chemtrailing, but that the beams they're firing into it is already resonating with natural nuclei forming out of the ice crystals, and they're using the airwaves as the exhaust paths and the ice crystals as systems to beam data down over the horizon radar, heating the atmosphere. It's everything.
Oh, yes, and that's the problem. It gets into a lot of different areas. And by the way, in 1995, when I had just was receiving it was late '94 when I first got the United Nations treaty. Very late. I mean, it's like the end of the year. At the beginning of '95, I was able to get. Again, utilizing a friend out of Washington, et cetera, I contacted the right person, and they sent me what amounted to being probably 1,000 documents. It was 2 cardboard cartons, and this came out of the United States Air Force, and it was their entire weather as a force multiplier. It was the entire concept of not only how they were doing it or planned to do it and how it was being put together, but global weather networking and the application of military systems for weather modification operations.
And by the way, you said this 15, 16 years ago. It's all been declassified now. The exact names that you've used, what they've talked about. And again, Bill Gates says that he's going to have this global weather bureau that controls your weather. And see, if you don't pay him, well, then some bad things are going to happen.
It's amazing. Now, and also to say that I said something just briefly or a couple of minutes ago, there's a 3-sided deal to this now. All right, so we have what I call the covert government, the secret government that's trying to control and mess up America's future here and putting it all into their pockets, so to speak. One world government control.
They're threatened by freedom because it will stop their monopoly. They're bad guys.
Right. And what they've also done now, however, way back a long time ago, the Russians were involved with us directly at Lawrence Livermore Laboratories. The Russians were even given an award for their cooperation, but they were here in Lawrence Livermore Laboratories working with our scientists on some of the earlier concepts on this many years ago. So what happened was the Russians back in the 90s, around the period of time that I was getting a hold of all of this, the Russians set up a company called ELATE, ELATE, and this was the Russian weather control and modification.
And they don't hide it. That's why they cleared things out for the Red Square events. I mean, they advertise they control the weather.
Right. They actually said that back in the 90s that for a couple of $100 American, a farmer could get guaranteed rain over his area and all that. Now, I don't know if they ever got to be good enough to do that, but when they started becoming running out of money, okay, when they all fell apart and all the rest of that, they sold this technology that they had actually developed with us, hand in hand, behind, under the table, all right? They sold a tremendous amount of this to the Red Chinese. So Red China now, with all of their money, see, they're able to purchase all of these weapons and things that previously they didn't have. They could, because now they have more money than they know what to do with, because we buy everything through Kmart and Walmart. But anyhow, so now what we end up with, we have the Russians with the potential to do it. We have the Americans, covert operations doing it. And we have the potential of the Red Chinese. The Red Chinese Weather Control Modification Organization has 37,000 employees. Read my lips, 37,000. Now, of course, this is spread out all over. They do a little bit of everything. But that's how big the Chinese weather modification operation is.
Amazing. Stay there. I can't believe this has gone by so fast. We're going to have you back up again. We'll be right back. I've got some key intel. I was looking into the Iron Mountain report, and I've got links here where U.S. News and World Report did an investigation and found that when President Johnson read it, he, quote, hit the roof and ordered it suppressed for all time. Then top Harvard professor John Kenneth Galbraith, you've heard of him, said that he actually, as a consultant, worked on the book, and it's just like Tragedy and Hope. That was written so CIA people, section chiefs can understand, well, wait, we back communist and fascist and socialist as long as it's command and control. Even their own people need something so they can understand what they're doing, even though they're evil. And so, yes, Iron Mountain is real. Plus, look at it. It's all coming true. Just incredible. But you know, speaking of all this, they would say there's no such thing as weather modification. You're insane. Now they've shifted gears and, oh, yeah, Dubai's putting up giant antenna arrays, controlling the weather, making their desert green. Oh, yeah, this is happening. And then we see key areas ravaged. And even meteorologists, weather people are saying this doesn't look normal. And they're like, shut up, everything's fine. I think it's undoubted they're using this to attack the United States so they can then fearmonger and say, pay Al Gore, pay the Rothschilds money, or it's all over.
Well, right. Here's the problem now. Like you said, Dubai is into it. See, Dubai has all the money in the world, too. So they're actually subcontracting weather control operations by, hiring the Russians or the Chinese to go in and do it, or even the United States covertly under the table. If you got enough money, you can get anybody to do anything. But as we stand right now, and by the way, one of the lead letters, a cover letter, so to speak, with the United Nations treaty stated that now that we have the ability to control and manipulate the weather, create tornadoes, hurricanes, and earthquakes. That is specified that now we have the ability to make earthquakes and control the weather. We have to agree that we won't use it as a weapon of war. That was part of the United Nations treaty itself. And what we have now is the possibility of our own people creating all of these outrageous unknown tornadoes that come from no place in 5 minutes and disappear in 10 minutes after doing billions of dollars of damage. We have either that or we have the Red Chinese doing it to us because they are having weather like the weather we've had. And Russia has been having freezing weather and extraordinary storms of different types.
And fires. And
back and forth. And so the question is, are we today in the middle of the forecasted weather wars? Are we today, the people, ourselves and Red China and Russia, are we into a three-way, a major war right now using invisible microwave-type weapons and plasma beams to do all of these things, because they do exist. And there's that old adage is we've never created a weapon and we've not used, and that's the story of mankind. So the idea that maybe this is not happening or that it's artificial, no. It's here. They have the ability, and if and it's terrible because you can't find it. You can't see the beam from the satellite.
Well, that's the thing about technology and these weapons race. They always have to use it as a laboratory test in the real world because they're always racing with other groups to get that edge.
Like the atomic bomb, there's never been a weapon that we've created that we have put on the shelf and not used.
Bob Fletcher, investigations.com. You're one in a billion. Look forward to having you up in the near future for another hour. We'll discuss some other important topics. Thank you so much for the time, Bob.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. I'm Alex Jones of Infowars.com. If you believe in this information and want to support its viral spread, go to the InfoWars store at Infowars.com. We've got the new G.I. Joe Infowars t-shirts. We've got the incredible Pro Pure gravity-fed filters available at Infowars.com in the store. We've got a new DVD, Scientists Under Attack, the Don't Tread on Me flag. We've got all sorts of different bumper stickers to help spread the rebellion virally. It's all there. Wristbands, citizen rule books in every order. Order online at Infowars.com today. The water filters, the canteens, it's all there. Infowars.com.